Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. We're reading from Adi Lila chapter 7. And we will be beginning from 116 verse today. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate kiram yatkripatamam vande shikrum tintarinam paramananda madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hariyom Tatsa. The Lord is like a great blazing fire, and the living entities are like small sparks of the fire. Purport: all those sparks and a big fire are both fire, and both have the power to burn. The burning power of the fire and that of the spark are not the same. Why should one artificially try to become like a big fire, although by constitution he is like a small spark? It is due to ignorance. One should therefore understand that neither the Supreme Personality of Godhead nor the small spark-like living entities have anything to do with matter. But when the spiritual spark comes in contact with the material world, his fiery quality is extinguished. That is the position of the conditioned souls. Because they are in touch with the material world, their spiritual quality is almost dead. But because these spiritual sparks are all Krishna's parts and parcels, as the Lord states in Bhagavad Gita, Mamaeva Amshaha, they can revive their original position by getting free from the material contact. This is pure philosophical understanding. In the Bhagavad Gita, the spiritual sparks are declared to be Sanatan, eternal. Therefore, the material energy Maya cannot affect their constitutional position. Someone may argue, why is there a need to create the spiritual sparks? The answer can be given in this way. Since the absolute personality of Godhead is omnipotent, he has both unlimited and limited potencies. This is the meaning of the omnipotent. To be omnipotent, he must have not only unlimited potencies but limited potencies also. Thus, to exhibit his omnipotency, he displays both. The living entities are endowed with limited potency, although they are part of the Lord. The Lord displays the spiritual world by his unlimited potencies, whereas his limited potencies, the material world, is displayed. Whereas by his limited potencies, the material world is displayed. In the Bhagavad Gita 7.5, Lord says, Aparayam itastva anyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhutam mahabaho yayedam dharyate jagat. Besides this inferior energies, O mighty armed Arjun, there is another superior energy of mine which comprises all living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. The Jiva Bhuta, the living entities, control this material world with their limited potencies. Generally, people are bewildered by the activities of scientists and technologists. Due to Maya, they think that there is no need of God and that they can do everything and anything, but actually they cannot. Since this cosmic manifestation is limited, their existence is also limited. Everything in this material world is limited, and for this reason there is creation, sustenance and dissolution. However, in the world of unlimited energy, the spiritual world, there is neither creation nor destruction. If the personality of Godhead did not possess both limited and unlimited energies, he could not be called omnipotent. Anor Aniyan Mahato Mahiyan, the Lord is smaller than the smallest and greater than the greatest. He is smaller than the smallest in the form of the living entities and greater than the greatest in his form of Krishna. If there were no one to control, there would be no meaning to the conception of the Supreme Controller Ishwar. Just as there is no meaning to a king without his subjects, if all the subjects became king, there would be no distinction between the king and the ordinary citizen. Thus, for the Lord to be Supreme Controller, there must be a creation to control. The basic principle for the existence of the living entities is called Chidvilasa, or spiritual pleasure. The omnipotent Lord displays his pleasure potency as the living entities. The Lord is described in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12 as Anandamayo Abhyasad. He is by nature the reservoir of all pleasures, and because he wants to enjoy pleasure, there must be energies to give him pleasure or supply him the impetus for pleasure. This is the perfect philosophical understanding of the absolute truth. Verse 117. The living entities are energies, not the energetics. The energetic is Krishna. This is very vividly described in the Bhagavad Gita. The Vishnu Puran and other Vedic literatures purport, as already explained, there are three prasthanas on the path of advancement in spiritual knowledge, namely Nyaya Prasthan, Vedanta philosophy; Shruti Prasthan, the Upanishads and Vedic mantras; Smriti Prasthan, the Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, Purans, etc. Unfortunately, Mayavadi philosophers do not accept the Smriti Prasthan. Smriti refers to the conscious, so to the conclusions drawn from the Vedic evidence. Sometimes Mayavadi philosophers do not accept the authority of Bhagavad Gita and the Purans, and this is called Ardha Kukuti Nyaya, logic of half a hen. See Adi Lila 5.176. If one believes in the Vedic literatures, one must accept all the Vedic literatures recognized by the great Acharyas, but the Mayavadi philosophers accept only the Nyaya Prasthan and Shruti Prasthan, rejecting the Smriti Prasthan. Here, however, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu cites evidence from the Gita, Vishnu Puran, etc., which are Smriti Prasthan. No one can avoid the personality of Godhead in the statements of the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures such as Mahabharata and Purans. Lord Chaitanya therefore quotes a passage from the Bhagavad Gita 7.5. This is the verse we just read in the previous one. Aparayam itastva anyam prakritim vidhime param jiva bhutam mahabaho yayetam dharyate jagat. Verse 118. Besides these inferior energies, O mighty Amarjun, there is another superior energy of mind which comprises the living entities who are exploiting the resources of the material inferior nature. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is explained that the 5 elements of earth, water, fire, air and other ether constitute the gross energy of the absolute truth, and that there are also 3 subtle energies, namely the mind, intelligence and false ego, or identification with the phenomenal world. Thus the entire cosmic manifestation is divided into 8 energies, all of which are inferior, as explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Mama Maya Duratayaya. The inferior energy known as Maya is so strong that although the living entity does not belong to this energy, due to the superior strength of this inferior energy and the living entity, Jiva Bhuta forgets his real position and identifies with it. Krishna says distinctly that beyond the material energy, there is a superior energy which is known as Jitva, Jiva Bhuta or living entities. When in contact with the material energy, the superior energy conducts all the activities of the entire material and phenomenal world. The supreme cause is Krishna Janmadi Asayataha, who is the origin of all the origin of all energies which work variously. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has both inferior and superior energies, and thus difference between them is that the supreme energy is factual, whereas the inferior energy is the reflection of the superior. The reflection of the sun in a mirror or on water appears to be sun but is not. Similarly, the material energy is but a reflection of the spiritual world. Although it appears to be factual, it is not. It is only a temporary reflection, whereas the spiritual world is a factual reality. The material world with its gross and subtle forms is merely a reflection of the spiritual world. The living entity is not a product of the material energy, it is a spiritual energy. But in fact, with matter, he forgets his identity. Thus, the living entity identifies himself with matter and enthusiastically engages in material activities in the guises of a technologist, scientist, philosopher, etc. He does not know that not he is not at all a material product but is spiritual. His real identity thus being lost, he struggles very hard in the material world, and the Hare Krishna movement or the Krishna conscious movement is trying to revive his original consciousness. When we speak about Krishna consciousness movement, which is meant to make people intelligent, the conditioned living entity therefore misunderstands. He is so engrossed in the material concept of life that he does not think there can be any activities that are actually based on intelligence beyond the construction of skyscrapers and roads and manufacturing of cars. This is a proof of Maya Pita Jnana, or loss of the all intelligence due to the influence of Maya. When the living entity is is freed from the when a living entity is freed from all such misconception, he is called liberated. When one is actually liberated, he no longer identifies with the material world. The symptoms of mukti, liberation, is that one engages in spiritual activities instead of falsely engaging in material activities. Transcendental devotional service is the spiritual activity of the spirit soul. Mayavadi philosophers confuse such spiritual activity with material activity, but the Bhagavad Gita 14.26 confirms Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate so gunan samatitaya tan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in the spiritual activities of the unalloyed devotional service Avya Vicharini Bhakti is immediately elevated to the transcendental platform, and he is to be considered Brahma Bhuta, which indicates that he is no longer one who engages in the spiritual activities of unalloyed devotional service. Avyabhicharini Bhakti is immediately elevated to the transcendental platform, and he is to be considered Brahmabhut, which indicates that he is no longer in the material world but is in the spiritual world. Devotional service is enlightenment or awakening. When the living entity perfectly performs spiritual activities under the direction of a spiritual master, he becomes perfect in knowledge and understands that he is not God but a servant of the God. As explained by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Jiver Swarupahaya Krishnera Nityadas, the real identity of the living entity is that he is an eternal servant of the Supreme Master. CC Madhya Lila 20.108. As long as one does not as explained by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like we just read in CC Madhya 20.108. As long as one does not come to this conclusion, he must be in ignorance. This is also confirmed by the Lord in Bhagavad Gita 7.19. Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate Samahatma Sudurlabha. After many births of struggling for existence and cultivating knowledge, when one comes to the point of real knowledge, he surrenders unto me. Such an advanced Mahatma or great soul is very rarely to be seen. Thus, although the Mayavadi philosophers appear to be very much advanced in knowledge, they are not yet perfect. To come to the point of perfection, they must voluntarily surrender to Krishna. So we'll continue from verse